Vajan, a city where knowledge was worth more than gold. A place where books held the collective memory of humanity itself. Now, imagine that same city surrounded by armed men, extremists determined to erase that memory forever, to burn history down to ash. And then, picture this: one man, unarmed and unprotected, deciding that history would not die on his watch. This is the incredible true story of how centuries of priceless knowledge were saved, while terror and destruction moved closer, street by street. For centuries, the name Timbuktu echoed like a myth, a distant golden city buried somewhere in the vast sands of Africa. It was often dismissed as a legend, a place more of fantasy than fact, but the reality was far more astonishing. Between the 14th and 16th centuries, Timbuktu wasn't just a city. It was one of the most important centers of learning in the entire world. It was a beacon of intellectual light, drawing scholars and thinkers from across continents. Universities and libraries thrived at a time when many of Europe's most famous institutions of learning hadn't even been founded. The scholars of Timbuktu were pioneers. They wrote groundbreaking texts on astronomy, charting the stars with incredible precision. They developed advanced medical practices, explored complex mathematics, and established sophisticated legal systems. Their libraries overflowed with works of poetry that captured the human spirit and philosophical treatises that debated the very nature of existence. These weren't just books. They were testaments to a rich, vibrant, and profoundly intellectual African civilization. Many of these manuscripts predated the European Renaissance, offering a different narrative of who held the keys to knowledge in the pre-modern world. But here's what made this collection of knowledge so unique and so vulnerable. These manuscripts were not stored in grand, fortified museums or state-controlled archives. They were family treasures, kept in private homes, passed down from one generation to the next as sacred inheritances. Each family was a guardian of a piece of history, protecting texts written by their ancestors. This decentralized system had preserved them for centuries, but it also made them incredibly difficult to protect when disaster struck. And then, in the year 2012, disaster arrived. The political landscape of northern Mali fractured and collapsed into a brutal conflict. Extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda, armed and ideologically rigid, swept through the region and seized control of Timbuktu. Their reign was one of fear. They immediately began destroying ancient shrines and tombs, cultural landmarks that had stood for centuries, declaring them to be idolatrous. They imposed a harsh and unforgiving interpretation of law, silencing music, art, and free expression. And they declared many of the ancient manuscripts to be forbidden, heretical works that contradicted their worldview. The danger was immediate and terrifyingly clear. If the extremists found these vast collections of books, they would be burned without hesitation. The world watched in horror. Warnings were issued from international bodies, and governments expressed their deep concern. But Timbuktu was isolated, and the extremist control was absolute. Help was not going to arrive in time. The fate of hundreds of thousands of irreplaceable manuscripts, the intellectual heritage of a continent, hung by a thread. In this moment of crisis, one man decided he had to act. His name was Abdel Kader Haidara. He was not a soldier. He was not a politician. He was a librarian, a quiet, dedicated archivist. From a young age, Haidara had devoted his life to finding, collecting, and preserving these ancient manuscripts, often traveling to remote villages to persuade families to entrust him with their ancestral texts. He knew the city's secrets. He knew where the manuscripts were hidden, scattered across hundreds of private homes. And he understood, with chilling certainty, what would happen if they were discovered. As the extremist fighters consolidated their control over the city, Haidara made a decision that could easily cost him his life. The manuscripts had to disappear. They had to be smuggled out of Timbuktu before the soldiers started their systematic searches. It was a plan born of desperation, a monumental gamble against a ruthless enemy. There were no press conferences, no international rescue teams, no armed convoys for protection. The plan relied on the simplest of things and the bravest of people. It relied on ordinary metal footlockers, the kind you could buy in any market. It relied on the darkness of night, on small, discreet bribes to navigate checkpoints, and on traditional wooden canoes, gliding silently down the Niger River. Above all, it relied on absolute silence. This was not a one-man mission. It was a conspiracy of librarians and scholars, a secret network of ordinary citizens who became heroes. Entire families took part. Elders whose hands trembled with age worked alongside young people and even children, all united by a single purpose: to save their history. The script was wrapped with extreme care. Some were fragile scrolls, more than 600 years old, their pages brittle, and their ink faded. They were gently placed into the metal boxes, sealed, and prepared for the most dangerous journey of their existence. The risks were almost unimaginable. If a single box was opened at a checkpoint, if one suspicious soldier decided to look a little closer, everything would end. Not just the mission, but the lives of everyone involved. Several times, convoys of vehicles carrying the precious cargo were stopped by armed militants. The question was always the same, sharp and suspicious: "What are you carrying?" And the answer, delivered with a calm they could not possibly have felt, was always the same: food, rice, grain, household goods, anything but the truth. Imagine the tension of those moments. A single thorough inspection would have exposed the entire operation. It would have revealed not just the books deemed heretical by the occupiers, but the people who were defying them, the brave men and women protecting them. Yet, miraculously, the convoys passed. Checkpoint after checkpoint, the trucks and cars loaded with history slipped through the net. History kept moving, hidden in plain sight. For months, this clandestine exodus continued. Manuscripts left Timbuktu in a steady, silent stream. They traveled by canoe down the river, were carried on the backs of donkeys through treacherous terrain, and were hidden in the back of aging trucks that rattled along dusty roads. It was a logistical masterpiece, orchestrated by a librarian, powered by the courage of a community. In total, more than 350,000 manuscripts were transported to safety in Bamako, the capital city in the south, far from extremist control. An astonishing feat of cultural preservation carried out under the nose of a brutal regime. When the extremists finally set fire to Timbuktu's public libraries, they did so with a sense of triumph, believing they were eradicating the city's intellectual soul. They filmed the flames, broadcasting their act of destruction to the world as a victory. But they were celebrating a hollow victory. The shelves they burned were already empty. 3. The real treasure, the memory of Timbuktu, had already escaped. The full story only became public much later, after the city was liberated. Journalists and historians arrived, expecting to document a cultural catastrophe, to find nothing but ruins and ash. Instead, they discovered something extraordinary, a story that seemed almost too incredible to be true. The greatest cultural rescue of the 21st century had already happened, in secret. It was a victory achieved with no weapons, no armies, and no bloodshed. It was won by books and by the ordinary people who refused to let them disappear. The survival of these texts did more than just preserve history. It revealed an uncomfortable truth for many. It proved that Africa possessed a deep, advanced written tradition of science, law, and philosophy, long before colonial narratives tried to erase it. It showed that knowledge did not belong to one civilization or one part of the world. It was a powerful counter-narrative, a testament to a history that had been deliberately told incompletely. And that is precisely why the manuscripts were so dangerous to the extremists. Their very existence challenged the narrow, ignorant worldview the militants were trying to impose. But they survived. Today, those rescued manuscripts are still being carefully restored, digitized, and studied by scholars. Many of them have never been fully read or translated, holding secrets and knowledge yet to be discovered. Their journey is not over. They are a living library, waiting to share their wisdom with the world. And this incredible story leaves us with a lingering question. How many other truths about our past are still hidden, buried, or lost? Simply, because someone at some point in history tried to destroy them before we had the chance to read them. If you want to discover more real stories of knowledge that nearly vanished from history, stories of courage and preservation against all odds, subscribe to the channel and continue this journey with us, because sometimes the bravest act is not firing a weapon, but saving a page. Thank you for watching.